I was 15 years old going into my last year of high school, and my father bought a scrap processing operation in East Chicago, Indiana. And shortly thereafter, he had a severe heart attack, and my sister was trying to keep the business together. And so I received a special permit to drive early before I was 16. And I scheduled my classes for my final year of high school from 8 to 12. And at 12 o'clock, I would jump into a car and drive out from the south side of Chicago to East Chicago, Indiana, to help her run this business. And I did that until I graduated. We sold the business in 1940, late 1940, and it ended up being a very large operation. Marco Iron and Metal ended up owning that particular facility in East Chicago. So I was in the business at a very old age of 16, and decided that the scrap business was not my forte.
So what was the business name when you came into
East Chicago Iron and Metal.
Okay, right. And it was just your dad and your sister working in it?
Dad, my sister, and myself.
What was the what did it handle?
It handled ferrous and non-ferrous, and they brought in automobiles, and we had a crew there that took them apart with sledgehammers and acetylene torches. We had 2 ramps that were on wheels that we would wheel up to the gondola car, and with wheelbarrows they would put in the finished scrap, and we'd wheel them up and dump them into the gondola car and move the platforms so that you filled the car up all of the way. We did have a grapple. We didn't have a magnet at that stage. We had a grapple that was able to handle some of the material in order to put it in place, like the automobiles. We had a small crane that wouldn't handle a lot, but all of the loading was done pretty much by hand. It was very labor intensive, Ken, to say the least.
You must have had to be pretty strong, or very.
We had strong people, yeah, and I think I had the weak mind at that time. So it was an experience that led me to say that when I decided what my profession was going to be, it was going to have nothing to do with the scrap processing industry at all. And
oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I went on to a city college when I graduated, and I was there for 17th and 18th year, and then I went into the Army at 18. So I had a chance to think about my future while I was in service for 3.5 years.
What did you study at City College?
Business. I always felt that I was good at accounting. I was good at administration, and so I was going into that direction when I went in. And as an aside, I worked with a company called Chicago Title and Trust, and that helped pay my tuition because my father was not working at that time. And I did administrative clerk duties there, very menial. And I liked the office atmosphere. It was a very welcome change after all of the grime and the dirt and the sweat of the in those days, the junk business, naturally. And that was a stigma, too, that I really didn't like. There was a very low esteem rate in the society for people who were in the scrap iron and metal business at that time. And I guess that it's a matter of ego. You don't like to be associated with something that has that low esteem value. So all things indicated that I would never be in the scrap processing business as a future until I came back from the service. And my sister was married to a fellow who had a small scrap operation in Chicago. He and his father developed cancer and was terminal. and he knew he was going to be on his own, and asked me if I'd join him. I said, no, I want no part of the business at all.
What was that business?
That was Englewood Iron and Metal Company in Chicago. Well, as luck would have it, he was weighing something one day, testing the scale, and they had a 50-pound weight that they would put on the scale for the city inspectors to see that your scales were in order and they were operating under regulation. Somebody distracted him, and he dropped his 50-pound weight on his foot, and he broke a couple of toes and had to be laid up for a few days. And to keep the door open, I went in there and I stayed there from 1947 to 1965. So from all of my resolve to stay out of the business, I was dropped in there by a 50-pound weight.
That's a great story. Well, now, before we continue on with how your career progressed, let's talk a little bit more. I was very interested about the way scrap was processed and handled back then, because it sounds so primitive. But tell me a little bit more about all the ways it was handled and processed, and the workers and how they had to deal with it.
Well, I don't even remember what staff we had there, but I know we got things in almost every way. Farmers would bring in some farm implements from the surrounding area of Indiana. It was very rural. We had a couple of horse and wagon peddlers still in those days. They went out and they would pick up batteries and things of that nature and bring them in. Then we had the small truck people as well, and some private people would come in with pots and pans, and the bedsteads in those days were practically brass covered, and you'd see them, and the copper kettles and things of that nature, and they would bring this in. So you had the gamut. You had private horse and wagon peddlers, truck peddlers, and farmers that brought material in. That was the inflow. Then there were a couple of small industrial plants in the area that we would have a schedule of pickups. We would send our truck out. There were no container boxes or anything sophisticated at all. When they had some material put together on the side, they wanted to get rid of it, you went there and they loaded the truck, and we brought it in. And that was the way the material came in. And it would come in, and we had a non-ferrous fellow who would take it and clean the brass steads and take the iron off of the copper kettles, and that was it. There was nothing in. Oh, I think we had a small alligator shear in the metal room that helped them take off. But most of it was done with hammers and chisels in the metal room. That was your tools. And out in the yard for the ferrous, we had an alligator shear, and you had the acetylene torches, and you had sledgehammers for breaking up the cast radiators and that's the boiler sections that came in. It was all done by hand. And we had, there was a small Hispanic community around East Chicago, and then the African American community, and we just kept trying to get hard workers from there. And some, almost not very little different from today. You had those that came out there that were dedicated and conscientious, and you knew were going to be there each and every day. And then you had the peripheral ones that you replaced on a continuous basis. So you had a nucleus of a staff, and then you just filled in as you needed them.
How large was your staff at the time?
Oh, I imagine we had probably a person in the non-ferrous department, and we had probably 5, 6, or 7 out in the field. And then we would load, when we loaded cars, you took in part-time people, because there was only so many loads you could go up and down, the ramp, and dump into the railroad car before they fell out. So you had to have a volume of people there to finish up a carload when it came in there. It would take us probably, I think we were allowed in those days 48 hours free time on a railroad car. And we normally If we started really early in the morning and worked until dark, we would be able to load the car in 2 days.
One car.
One car.
What must the injury rate been like, or what happened to these employees? It sounded like they would have had a lot of injuries and stuff.
I don't recall anything real serious, Kent. Oh yeah, you had some back pains and a guy slip and sprain his ankle and things of that nature that I recall. But I, thank goodness, don't recall any serious injuries that I could put my finger on at this time.
My, incredible.
And so that wasn't the greatest experience in the world for me. Uh, and when I got into Englewood Iron and Metal, that was a misnomer because we handled paper and we handled rag product in those days. Uh, we used to get a lot of cotton mattresses in. That was before the advent of the innersprings. So the mattresses were wholly cotton in those days. So you baled the cotton and you baled the rags in different grades. And we didn't handle high grade paper. All we handled was the newspaper, corrugated magazines, and mixed paper in those days. And we had a grade called office paper, which was a heterogeneous product that anything that had stationery, attached to it, that was office paper. So those were our commodities in those days. Didn't have sophisticated names like ONP and OCC and all of the grades of your high grades, your whites and everything like that. It was fundamental. That was it. And we got up to 3 upstroke economy balers in the plant, and we had a small ferrous operation with a magnetic crane. And I may say that we became innovative. We were the first firm to go out and buy a mobile crane with a magnet on it and send that crane out to pick up material, not only for ourselves, but to contract out to a broker would call us and say, I have a load of cast iron out at so-and-so's yard. Send your crane out there in your trucks, break up the cast to cubulo size, put it on your trucks and deliver it to us, and they would pay us for the service. And that was very innovative at the time. And it gave me a chance to really become acquainted with all the dealers and the brokers in the Chicago and near Chicago area, because I became somewhat a service organization for their product as well.
How did your brother-in-law keep you in the business that long?
Made me president of the company, so I'd have to stay around there. I became the company, and he would take care of the day-to-day operations there, and I just did about everything else, financially, the associations with all of the, and that's when I joined the Chicago chapter of ISIS. It was in probably the middle 50s, and I was a member.
And did you enjoy that 1947 to 65 period at all?
I really did. I became enamored with what the scrap business was. I had a chance to see the total picture of what was going on and the service that this gave to the community. And it sounds hokey, but I realized before recycling became the popular watchword that this was a service organization. It was a business that created a very good part of society's needs to get rid of product that would otherwise just flood the landfills.
So when did you start developing an interest in the equipment side, or how did you segue into the equipment side?
Well, by the late 50s, I realized that you had to make a movement towards heavy machinery. The balers were coming on stream. Shredders were beyond my belief at that point, but I knew we had to have either heavy shear or a heavy baler to stay competitive, and the ideology there between my brother-in-law and I was completely at 180 degrees. He wanted to stay small, keep on handling the peddlers that we were handling, and I knew that all we were doing was working for our laborers. For a period there for 2 years, we would sign our checks and we couldn't cash them. And at some point, my wife said, you know something, this business is not supposed to be philanthropic. It's supposed to afford us a way of living as well. And she was so right, and I could see that this just wouldn't work. And in 1965, or it might have been even in 64, a friend of mine, the Reuben Graff Company out in a southern suburb of Chicago, had put in a shredder built by Russ Harris, no doubt, no less. And he needed it. For some reason or other, they built it too narrow, the in-feed conveyor, to take a complete car, which you had to put in there. And so he said, Norm, you got to come out here. There's a fellow here from Texas that's designed an auto flattener for me that not only flattens it down, but has a side ram to push it in so the car will then be a dimension that can go into my shredder. And so I went to the demonstration and I met Bob Flanagan, who is the inventor of the mobile auto flattener. And we just meshed. And I said, well, my brother-in-law and I differ on what's going on in scrap processing. This to me looks like it has some future. And to make a long story short, Bob and I formed Mobile Auto Crushers. I came up with the name, and he needed some financial support. I still had the banks that believed in me. Why, I don't know, but they did. And so we formed Mobile Auto Crushers Incorporated in 1965. And in 67, they didn't realize it, but the Chicago Truck Drivers Union did me a favor. They struck our plant in Chicago, and we knew we couldn't survive with the rates that the truck drivers wanted to put on our people. And so I went to a labor attorney, and we did a year's liquidation. We just liquidated the company in 67, and it took us about a year and a half. They gave us 18 months to liquidate. And in 1969, we moved down to Texas in the manufacturing business.
What were you doing while the liquidation was going on as far as the mobile auto crushers?
I was traveling down. I would go down Sunday night. I would go down to Dallas, and I worked there until Thursday. Then I would come back to Chicago, and Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, I would work with my brother-in-law on the liquidation of the company, and that went on for over a year and a half.
What was it like moving from Chicago to Texas at that time?
A culture shock.
I'm sure Dallas was hardly the metropolis it is today.
No, and in fact, we always kid about it. One night we drove down, and Stemmons Freeway was the big crossroads of the area, and we were driving down what that time they just finished up was LBJ, the freeway, that's named after Johnson. And as we came around the corner, there was an enormous sign, and it said, Dallas, home of the John Birch Society. And that was a culture shock. So, but we're very fortunate. We built 7 or 8 machines out in the open at a little sheet metal shop that Flanagan had down there. And then we were able to approach a division of United Transport. They're called Auto Warehousers. And we made a deal with them that they would build the machine at cost plus a $5,000 profit. And they built about 40 to 50 machines for us over a period. And then it looked like we might be successful, and we made a deal with them, and their parent company, which was called the Woods Corporation, bought us out in 1971.
What were your responsibilities, Norm, once you were down in Dallas? What did you do to get the company rolling?
I was president of Mobile Auto Crushers, Inc., and had some friends in the business, among them the Prohlers. And they just opened up their joint venture uh, with Hugo New in Boston. And Hugo New's nephew, Ernest Strauss, was running the plant. And he called me and said, come up to Boston. I want to talk to you. He says, you've got a machine that will get material from out of our normal perimeter of influence, and we need that flow. I couldn't rub two quarters together. We had no money. And so I struck a deal with Ernest that, number one, if we got a good customer, they would advance us funds to build a machine. And if we needed the payments they would take as they delivered the product, they would hold out a couple of dollars a ton so that we would be assured that the payments would be made if we financed this company. And we did that, and it worked out very, very well. And on other plants, and then Luria Brothers came to us for their Cleveland plant, and we pretty much did the same thing. And through those brokerage relationships, we were able to develop the company. Then in 1971, this went from about 67 to 71. We had built, as of 71, we'd built 210 flatteners. And the company bought us that was building them, Auto Warehouses, their parent company, Woods Corporation, bought our company. We became a division of Woods. And I found out later that they determined that the market for this machine was probably, 600 to 700. They assumed that we would get half of the market and Aljon would have the other half of the market. So if we hit 350 to 400 units on in our volume, we would be a very successful purchase. And so when I retired in 94, I think we had delivered about 2,100 machines, and they're still selling them. I still talk with the people at Mac, even though I've been retired, and they probably now got 23 or 2,400 out. So I was supposed to know the business, and it shows you how much I know really about it.
When did the company change its name to the acronym MAC Corp?
When they bought us in 1971, they changed it to Mobile Auto Crushers Corporation. That was the new entity. Then as we bought other firms, we bought a Baylor company, and then we bought Saturn Shredders, and then we bought, they changed it to MAC, M-A-C Corp, to give it a wider generic coverage.
Now, you said the very first one that you saw was to help that one shredder have car bodies a little thinner to fit on its conveyor.
Yep.
How did you go about promoting this product to other shredders? What was the advantage that you told them about it?
Our only reason for being, and by the way, that was the one and only that we made with that side squeeze.
Oh, okay.
Because it wasn't necessary. All the rest of the shredding companies were building them wide enough to take a whole car, which made some pretty good sense, wouldn't you say? So that was the one and only. Our only reason for being Ken was to be able to make volume deliveries to the shredding plants. Instead of putting 3 or 4 automobiles on a conveyance to the plant, flattening them allowed them to send a 22, 23-ton load from distances which permitted the freight costs to allow them to deliver to the shredders. So any shredding plant that went in knew that they had to draw material from further than their close-in perimeter. Even Chicago, with the enormous population and everything in Chicago, when you had 2 or 3 shredding plants in Chicago, each of them found that they had to reach out. So we sold to, at that time, Kaplan was a partner with Proler, Prolarized to Chicago, then Pilot went in, and then Fritz went in, and then we developed those customers because they needed to reach out to get the product that they needed to shred. That was our forte. And I had a pretty good relationship with all of the shredders, and they knew that if I went in there and they took me into their confidence, it stayed there, because that was the only way that I could keep my credibility. Was they knew that if I saw Proler today and then I saw Fritz tomorrow and then saw Bear the next day or what have you, those conversations remained confidential. And that's how we built up our company.
Let's talk a little, Norm, about how the product changed and progressed in terms of its design and engineering. I mean, I assume it was pretty simple in the beginning, and how has it improved over the years?
I think there's been a continuous improvement in it. The basic machine is still the same. It has one design to flatten an automobile as effectively and efficiently and with as little maintenance necessary on it. And that hasn't changed at all. What has changed is the way, the quality of your cylinders, the types of steel you do, the way you permitted the guides to wear in easier. And this was a learning process. And we had some pretty good engineers who found there were better ways of doing things and still keeping the simplicity and the lack of maintenance needs. And that's the way the machine is. I think I brought a picture of a 1967 machine. To an untrained eye, that machine of 67 and one of 98 look basically the same. And there is an enormous change that evolved in that period in all of the things. But it still looks pretty much the same.
Small refinements.
Yes, they were really small refinements in the thing, in the quality of the hydraulics, in the flows, in the design of the axles, in the upgrade of remote controls, all of the things that are needed as you grow into more technologically needed equipment.
Is there anything you would point out as being the most revolutionary or substantial change, though? I mean, out of all the small changes, what was the biggest change that happened to it? Or the biggest advancement of it, even if it was...
I would think probably, as far as an operator is concerned, the real development of the remote control is probably one of the major factors. That you eliminate a laborer, and as labor costs and all the peripheral costs of keeping a labor there necessitated the elimination of that man. And the remote control is a very effective one, building in the safety factors for it. We worried terribly about the possibility of a forklift operator 100 feet away, and if somebody's up there, and this happened in one case where they initiated the lid and the fellow was on there and it cut his fingers off. Those things you had to realize, even though they shouldn't happen, that they are going to happen. And that's the thing that we had to address. And when it happened, we just couldn't believe, how can somebody with a lid up possibly lean their hands on there and allow that thing to crush their hands. And it was the furthest thing from our mind that this could ever occur. But when it occurred, we found out that you had to address that.
And when did these remote control technologies come on?
I would say we started to think about them in the early 80s. And there were some primitive ones that we probably put on 81, 82, 83. the real development and the really well operating ones started about 85.
How about, Norm, the way they handle any environmental concerns related to processing cars or flattening cars like that?
Uh, we were fairly lucky because in the concept of coming down, you contain the material. Aljon had more difficulty because their stuff flew around a lot with their concept. The oil was the next thing. So what we did primitively, we tilted the bed so that if there was oil accumulation, it would flow into the corners, and we put holes with an oil can down underneath it to catch the oil so it wouldn't spill onto the ground. And each of these, even though they were primitive, were very effective. And any OSHA or EPA man that came out and saw it, right, saw that you were containing the oil in there, that everything was contained within the body frame of the machine so it didn't go all around. And then as your dirt accumulated in there, somebody would lock the lid in position and go in, shovel the stuff out, hopefully, and put it into a garbage container. So you didn't affect the land and you didn't create any hazards on the ground. So we were fortunate in being able to do that. And naturally, Aljon, when our patent was up, went to the same push down thing to I think for probably the same reasons.
Now, Norm, I recall something happening in the late 60s, I believe it was, that President Johnson or Lady Bird Johnson had this beautification program with old cars. Did that make a big difference in your sales or your popularity in the Mac?
Oh, it certainly did. Yeah, absolutely. I think the beautification program was probably one of the prime items for the impetus of the cars. One of our first projects was up in the Catskills. That naturally was a resort area. And the two attorneys that handled the Catskill Resort Association called us, and we went in there, and they told us that all of the resorts, and Mama Grossinger, who was one of the real pioneers in that area, said, every gully here has got cars in it, and I don't want my customers to come here and have an eyesore. I want them all cleaned up. And so she told these attorneys to get the people to do it. Well, it was good because in New York, they had just opened up the plant, the Polarized Chiabo new plant, and they said, yeah, you get operators, we want the material. And so we sold through these attorneys. They were able to get us buyers. As an aside, and you'll get a kick out of this, I don't know if you remember, they had demolition derbies up in New York State. And as the cars were demolished, they would take them out, and one of our flattener operators had a flattener there, and they'd bring it out and they'd flatten it down. Who happened to be at one of those demolition derbies but a couple of engineers from IBM? And they said, this has got a pretty good concept. We're wondering if this would be applicable to a situation that we have. So I get a call from IBM, and I go up to the first plant I went to, I think, trying to think now, I don't even remember which was the first plant. Whatever it was one of the New York plants that they had. And they took me out into the warehouse, and they said, here's a trailer being loaded with our machines to come back. And these happen to be bank machines from the Chase Manhattan Bank. And they had an IRS man there checking off the machine, they cataloging it, they picked it up and took it and put it on the trailer. And then they did this for each and every machine, and they ended up with two trailers. They closed it, sealed, put a lock seal on there, and then took this to a scrap processor. And they, at the plant, they opened up the door, they took it out, and they put it in the baler, and they made a bale out of 2 or 3 machines. And then the IRS man checked off, he said, those machines are cleared, and then they would allow them up because they didn't want them to use anything from those things. They'd been written off completely. And so the IBM engineer said, do you think your machine will flatten these bank machines. I said, well, let's try it. So I had one of our operators go outside that, and they had to have the IRS man there. And because we had a floating lid, these were pretty heavy structures on the corners. If you came straight down, you couldn't do a thing. There was no way of hitting them. So what I had him do is tilt the lid and attack it from the side where it would go, and then go over and attack it from the, and we were able to flatten them down. And we ended up selling machines to IBM at all of their installations around the world. Dusseldorf, IBM London, Japan, just to show you how some things happen.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
That is amazing. Any other interesting applications like that that are not related to cars, or any other funny stories related to other materials processed in your flatteners?
Well, we've got a baler underground and underwater doing nuclear waste. We have a baler at Oak Ridge doing glove boxes that have been used for plutonium, and they are flattening those so that they can, baling those so that they can send them out for burial. And you know how expensive nuclear waste burial is, so it's enormous. Those are interesting ones. The one underground is doing material that has to be baled in a underwater because of the flows off of it that it gives, the radioactive waves, and they can only contain them in this liquid base. And so they do it all with remote control grapples and put it in the baler, activate the baler, and then take it out, and this stuff goes into burial. I think they put it encased in something. I'm not familiar with the final disposition. Those are real interesting ones.
How about the Saturn shredders line, or any other lines of equipment you all handled? Did you get that involved in those as well?
Yes, I happen to be instrumental in buying Saturn. We were at a convention, and our next door booth was Saturn shredders, and Vern and Pat Berta, the Mr. and Mrs. of Saturn, and my wife Happy and I began to be good social friends, and we'd go out to dinner together and everything. And then one year, Vern said we'd like to be acquired by somebody for be able to develop this thing further. And so we put a deal together, and Mac Corporation bought Saturn Shredders, which really gave us the opening for all the things. We could only sell Mac flatteners, Mac balers to scrap processing firms, I mean, basically. The Saturn Shredder opened up an entire new vista to plastics and the gamut of industry in the United States and the world. It was an excellent purchase.
Now the Saturn shredders are low speed, high torque kind of shredders.
Correct.
And what do they primarily use to just size reduce products?
Right. You take a big chunk of purging of plastics. They can't do anything with it, so they used to have to go out to a landfill. Now we can put that purging in there, reduce it, and they can go back and extrude it out into new plastics. So that was a big application. We have quite a few Saturn shredders as pre-preparing the cable for the wire chopping lines. So that's something there. There isn't anything that I can think of, Kent, that it's not applicable to for size reduction. There is one, yeah. We found a gummy material of natural rubber was produced by somebody, and it was terrible. It got gummy until somebody told us that if you take Johnson's baby powder and you pour Johnson's baby powder all over the chamber of this gummy stuff, I said, oh, that's ludicrous. I mean, Johnson. Well, we did it, and it went right through without gumming up at all, just as clean as a whistle. Johnson baby powder.
How about as far as the technological side of those pieces of equipment? Have they changed much over the years?
Oh, enormously, yeah. there was, when we bought Saturn, we realized that there was a lot of need for upgrading in engineering, and we were able to do that. In fact, the president of Mac Saturn now, Glenn Newton, is a brilliant engineer, and he has lent a great deal of upgrade to the Saturn shredder. There were shaft failures, there was seal failures, there were overpowered. There was no need to have the kind of horsepower that were on there. And Glenn, in tune with some outside engineers, really went to work and made the Saturn a brilliant engineering product. We were very, very proud to sell Saturn after the first couple of years. We were a little had some trepidation the first couple of years, but we put them into applications where we knew that they would work well and not have the kind of need for strength that they really didn't have at that time. So we were selective in where we would put them. But now they can, almost any application that there is that can be reduced in a high-speed, low-torque, a low-speed, high-torque machine, they're being used.
What was what were the few things you really enjoyed most about getting back into or getting into the sales side, the manufacturing side versus being in the processing side?
Yeah, just about everything. I hate yard operations. I dislike managing the yard in itself. I never was able to get to where I enjoyed that, and being away from that, I think, is the happiest part of being a part of the scrap processing industry without having the horrible part of running a yard operation. I'm no engineer. I'm very good at material handling, and I can see things that'll help people out in material handling. And I always try to eliminate, as much as possible, man hours, having people around. That to me is one of the most difficult parts in the scrap processing industry, the need for any manual labor that is necessitated by the product that you're handling. And it is necessary in sorting and in certain things. And if I could eliminate them completely, I probably would certainly consider that one of my feats of what I could give to the scrap processing industry.
How about competition? After Bob Flanagan created this, how fast did others start copycatting, and how fast did your competition grow?
Well, Al John was pretty much in the stages of getting established as well. So at one point, it was either Al John or Mac. There was no place else to go. Then Mosley came up with a stationary flattener, and then somebody up in the Northwest came up with a flattener device. Then you had Johnson get into it a little bit later date. Pretty much, they're, other than the ones from overseas, which have not penetrated the market really, you pretty much have the three firms now that you go to. You either go to a Mac, an Aljon, or a Johnson. That's it. And the balers, naturally, they perforated. The Mac baler is got competition from every baling manufacturer there is around the world. That's a highly competitive field. Saturn, when it started out, was just about unique. Then one of our people, Tom Garnier, went out on his own shredding systems and became a formidable competition. And now you look under low-speed, high-torque shredders, and you'll probably find 25 manufacturers out there. So they jump on the bandwagon. You don't have too much time on your own before a successful product gets all of the copiers or the innovators, one or the other.
How international have your sales been of these products? Have they been mostly domestic, North America, or have they all?
They were. In the last 5 years that I was with the company, from about 80, well, it goes earlier than that. From about 1974, Happy and I visited just about every BIR. We went to twice a year. We felt that the international market was going to be the longevity item. That once you covered the domestic market, you had to go international, and we were limited success. We really didn't penetrate it like I thought he would because there were more reasonable machines on the continent and even in the UK as well that we had to compete against. We were lucky. We placed 8 or 10 machines in the UK. We placed probably 12 to 15 on the continent during that period, but it wasn't a roaring success. But the last 5 years that I was with Mac, we really penetrated. We had trade agreements with Japan and Korean firms, and on the continent as well. And both Saturn and Mac sold very, very well. So that when I left, there was a foundation, and now they've just gone overboard. The fellow that took over for me did a much, much better job than I ever did. He's really popping them out into the export market. They're doing a phenomenal job.
Now, over the years, and even now, like, what have been some of the biggest challenges or changes in the equipment market? I mean, is it just that you have more competition? Is it, I mean, any other big changes you've seen over the years in your niche or the general niche of scrap?
Well, naturally, the word "big" is semantics. What I may think is a real big change, in quotation marks, to someone else is a nothing. I hear at every convention, since I've been the chairman of the exhibitors committee, Norm, what is there out there today that's new? I said, in almost every case, there's something new out there. Ask the right questions of the person that's at the booth, and they'll tell you what is really new. You may not see it as you go by there in a cursory fashion because it looks like it did last year, but stand there and ask the question, and you'll find out what they've done. And you determine whether it's a big change or not that big a change. That's very subjective. And they come back and they say, yeah, you know, so-and-so really made a great change in that solenoid that I was having problems with, that they would curse at. It just kept going. And they put a new device. I think that's great. But it's a little solenoid or a trip switch or a limit switch. God, my guys were complaining about that limit switch. It just kept going. And they put a whole new thing on there. And it's great.
That's great. Now, you mentioned being involved in the ISRI exhibitor group. When did you start getting involved in things like that with the association?
Well, it was a very easy transition for me. You know, when I took over Mac Corporation, I knew a lot of the people in the industry at that time. I had dealt with the brokers and I dealt with some of the dealers, and I had a pretty good base to go off of. And I knew that I wanted to be a part of the structure of ISRI, not just somebody that came to the convention each year. And at that time, they had a very loose, but it got some manufacturers together. Terry Francis would have a social gathering at the convention, and he'd invite up a bunch of the exhibitors, and they would just interface with each other. What do you think of this location? What do you think we can do next year to get people to stay in the exhibit hall? What do you think we can do to get the board of directors to come when they've got meetings all the time? And we would kick these ideas around. Well, Terry, unfortunately, became ill, and he said, would you handle it? So I just sort of unofficially became the Terry Francis because he wasn't there. And it evolved into this exhibitors group that I think really gave some good ideas to the board of directors. And uh, some of the things that we asked for were not things that they could afford us. Some of the things we asked for could be implemented over a period of time, and some of them got immediate reaction. And it sort of became a ad hoc type of organization. And I think led to pretty much the Associate Domestic Council that you've got today. I think that's an outgrowth of our unofficial ad hoc group.
Now let's jump back to your career here more recently. You said you left Mac in '94.
Mm-hmm.
What brought about your decision to retire, so to speak?
Well, when we started this international business, and when Glenn Newton came on, the owner of the company said, "Norm, will you stay on for 5 years to help this transition and get the international thing going, and give Glenn a chance, to take hold?" And I was 65 at that time, and I said, "Okay, if I'm still healthy at 70, I will stay on until 70." And that was what I did. I stayed on until the end of '94, and they knew I was going to retire at that point. I was ready, and I think they were probably ready for me to retire as well. It was a very amiable type of thing. We had a wonderful, wonderful retirement party where we had the entire company there, and we kicked around how we started. And we said, we're talking too much with all of the people, the youngsters around. They said, "No, we love it. We had no idea that you started from these grassroots," and we were kicking the ideas around. They loved hearing about the trials and the tribulations of getting a company going that now is a major player in the industry. And we had a great time, and it's a wonderful memory. It really is, that we were able to do it in this fashion.
Now that makes you now 74 then?
I'll be 74 May 31st.
Okay, all right. Well, now at 74, almost 74, you have not really retired. You're still in this other new job, is that correct?
Yeah. This new job is based on my wife Happy saying that as long as our consulting business pays the phone bill, I can stay in it. And so far, we've done it. It's been fun, Kent. I thank God for the fact that I have health, and that my mental capacity is still somewhat intact, and I can come and see the people. I come to all the board meetings. I grew up with these people. I mean, I was part of the fraternity that was so warm and friendly, and you just wanted to come to the meetings to see your good friends. And when you can make a living selling equipment to those good friends, you got the best of both lives. It's wonderful. We pretty much combined our social and business lives with the people we love, and it was a labor of love. We never looked at it like. And the strangest thing, we'd go in to somebody in a small town to sell them a piece of equipment, and Happy and I are there. We'd say, "Let's go out to dinner." And we'd go out to dinner. Where would they take us? To their private club where we couldn't pay. I mean, and I said, where else, what other industry can you go visit people selling them a product? I'm basically a vendor, and they take you out to dinner and a beautiful night of social intercourse. I mean, it doesn't happen anywhere else. And this is why it's been such a love for us.
What do you do in Kramer Consultants now?
We will hear about somebody looking for a piece of equipment, and then we hear of somebody that may have someone who has that piece of equipment, and we try to put them together. Family businesses are in this age of consolidation. Somebody will call and say, without any undue publicity, we know that you're very discreet. We'd like to get somebody to take a look at us, and I will look that out and see if there's somebody that's interested in that particular thing, and put them together. Uh, Sometimes for a fee, a set fee. Sometimes we talk about a small percentage of what the consolidation amount will be. Uh, One of the toughest things, and I've talked to everybody that goes out of the business and becomes a consultant. For 40 years, somebody calls you in your company and asks you everything that you may know about anything. And you give them the free advice because you're getting a nice paycheck from your company. When you go out on your own, your time and your expertise is the only thing you have to sell. And it's difficult. If I've been talking to you for 40 years, giving you all of this free advice, you don't see why all of a sudden you should have to pay for it. And with a good friend, it's hard to say that until at some point my wife's nagging has said, Kent, I can probably get that information for you, but I think I'm entitled to compensation for it. And there's a little pause on the other side of the phone. I said, you're right. You do deserve compensation for it. Tell me what it's going to cost me. But that's only happened recently. It's a tough transition.
Why did you decide to do that at all and not just retire and do what you would like to do, hobbies, whatnot?
I listened to, hobbies. My wife's hobby is travel. So in between travel, I do some business. But that's first. First and foremost is our life. Happy and I enjoy being together. We've been together all of our married life. We enjoy travel a great deal. We enjoy cruising. So she has us on at least 3 or 4 cruises a year. We do some other trips where we know there's a meeting someplace and we'd like to go in and see some of the people there. We'll go there and we'll talk about what their needs are and things like that. But we also socialize. So it's been, again, the ability to carry on the best of both things, visiting with the people we like and still affording ourselves some income. You can't beat it. So we figured as long as you can't beat it, we might as well go along with it.
How about maybe as starting to wrap up some of these, I think some of
Yeah.
the walk-ins soon.
Yeah.
Do you look ahead at all with regard to your, the manufacturing side, the equipment side of the business, and have any vision of where things might be going, either in your specific products or even just in general as far as scrap processing, handling equipment goes?
I think everybody in the exhibition hall is talking about what's going on. The manufacturers and the vendors are concerned of who and what changes are going to be their customer base. Are the conglomerates going to have central purchasing? Are they going to allow the individual firms to buy on their own? Excuse me. Are you going to talk to the former owner, or are they going to put you in touch with a purchasing agent? Excuse me. All of these things are being discussed out there. I mean, it's not a vacuum. It's an industry that is going over almost a revolution. And how to adjust to this revolution, I think, is on everybody's mind. I think it's going to take a period of time here to see that evolvement.
Drink if you'd like. Let's see. Even though you had quite a chunk of your career in the processing side, even though you didn't want to, when you look back, is there anything about your career that you would like to change, or that would you do it again? Same way?
I think if you said you would have liked to change it, you'd probably end up doing the same thing over again anyhow. The mistakes you make are mistakes you would probably make over again as well. I think probably if I would have stayed in scrap processing, I would still be in Chicago and probably have a shredding plant or something of that nature, and have some people that would be there to tell me what technology would be necessary to do it right. That would be possibly the only change that I would make. I've loved the manufacturing business and the rapport with everybody, and I feel blessed with having been able to do that. Otherwise, I think probably owning a shredding plant would be the next best thing, with all of its woes. And I'm well familiar with its woes.
Great. Now, are those your notes on there?
Yes.
Did you have anything on there that I have not?
Let me see.
I'm wrapping it up, and I don't want to miss anything. If you had wanted to comment on something.
Well, I went into Mac to get some ideas from two of my associates there, Al Chaffin and Jack West, who were with me pretty much at the beginning. And they said I probably should mention a program that General Motors had up in Traverse City, Michigan, back in probably 68 or 69, to advertise and get public acclamation of the cleanup of the area. Traverse City was a beautiful resort area, Traverse City, Michigan, up there. And there was an awful lot of cars just laying all over the place. And they had university students going out and tagging them, and then they picked them up and brought them to a central station, and we had a flattener there flattening for a couple of days. And we had everybody, the chairman of the board of General Motors, all on down. And it was the cutest thing. When I went in there, I called the airport at Traverse City, and I said, be certain that you have a General Motors car for me to lease when I get there. And I land and go to the place, and they had one car left. What was it? A Ford. And so I had to call up and had somebody come over and pick me up because I couldn't go to that GM thing with a Ford. That's pretty much what they had in mind. One nice one in about 1971, there was a train wreck in Texas, and they accumulated all these brand new cars. They were heavy cars, big Chryslers and big Cadillacs, and they had to destroy them because of the jolt. And there was like 70 or 80 of them. And one of the fellas there was a tape deck, and he saw a tape in there. So he took the tape and he put it in his pocket. And he's walking out. One of the guards says, "What do you got in your pocket?" They were screening everything. Nothing, not even a tape, could go out of that installation. Everything had to be destroyed. Brand new cars. So that was one of the things they mentioned. I think, Ken, I think you pretty much covered anything that would be a part. I'm sure when I leave here, I'll think of a bunch of things that I said or should have said to Kent, but right now I think that's it.
Well, the great thing is that if you come to the board meetings, we might continue doing this at group meetings like that.
Mm-hmm.
So if you feel like you have more stories at some point or just want to talk about other topics, we would love to talk to you again. It's not the only time you'll get the chance.
Well, I think we've done very well. I didn't think we'd go this long. I saw Sammy Proler after his, and he said he went 2 hours.
I know, he did.
I said, well, if Sammy went 2 hours, I should go about 20 minutes, And I guess here comes your next client.
Actually, speaking of Sam, maybe one last quick thing is he was telling us how he really was the founder of the scrap shredder. Do you believe that?
I think I do. I really feel that Sam was the first one to certainly make it a scrap processing machine. So I would have to say that the polarized unit, to my knowledge, unless there was something out there that I did not know about, was the first shredder that I was able to deliver material to, anyhow, which selfishly was what I was thinking about at the time.